This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kaura and George Mavros from Sydney.
Welcome again to this exciting series of episodes that we are covering on the Ultimate Global Podcast to talk about personal growth and networking. And as you know, that one of the things about personal growth is also to take care of your health. There are two components to your health, as we all know. One is your physical health, and the other one is your mental health. And so we've got a coach today who talks about mental health, specifically men's mental health. And so the topic for today is men and mental health, and what a time to talk about it, because we just had World Mental Health Day in the last week. And I also shared a video on LinkedIn where I said that it's a very vulnerable and sensitive thing to talk about. People don't talk about it openly. But it's always good that we have a conversation, we have a discussion with somebody we feel comfortable to talk about. And we're going to dive deeper into that. So Miriam, do you want to introduce yourself to our guest today, what you do quickly, and then we can talk more about mental health, and specifically for men?
Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to have a conversation with you guys. And obviously we could probably talk for days, weeks, months about mental health and all the different aspects of how we grow. So in way of introduction for myself, I've been working as a coach for the past probably 11-ish years, probably a little bit longer now. And my background started in the fitness industry in my early 20s, which is where I learned a lot about coaching, training personal trainers, creating education, delivering education, and then moving through into more the management side of things. And then after the fitness industry, I was working in events, operations, and then continued more into my study in coaching, because I was just fascinated actually into how people think, how they operate, what motivates them to make changes. And predominantly, like, I was working with a lot of people either changing career or literally changing their health. And then as I kept going into the corporate world until most recently, when I was working as an in-house performance coach in an IT business, that really sort of taught me a lot about different ways of thinking and about how people achieve what they want in a more corporate setting. But the common thread and why I am a men's coach is that I've been working with men for most of my life. And you know what? I love men. I love working with men, and people always get a bit of a giggle when I say that, but I've had really good experiences working with men. However, the reason that we're here today is because through a lot of my work and clients over the years, I started to notice some patterns come up about where men will struggle as they're going through big changes in life. And that's what brought me to really focus my business on coaching men and helping them.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's an amazing background that you just shared about yourself. I want to start off with this first question before I pass it on to George for his set of questions. Is what sort of factors do you think influence men to talk about their mental health? So, they can be factors like how they have been born and brought up, which nationality they are coming from, what sort of culture and background they're coming from, and what really motivates them to open up about themselves, and whether they feel confident to open up about themselves. Because a lot of the times when you talk to men, it can be considered as a weakness to share your emotions or to talk about your mental health. Whereas I feel it's not a weakness. It's completely normal. If you're going through something which you want to share, you might not share with everyone because you don't feel comfortable sharing with everyone, but you can always share with people you trust and people you feel you can feel comfortable talking to. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you shared some really interesting insight there already, actually, and the answer is, of course, it can depending on how that you're brought up, your culture. And culture can be which part of the world that you came from, but culture can be the conditioning, the beliefs, the circumstances which you grew up. And you might have grown up on the same street as a bunch of other people, but depending on what was going on in your family, it might be very different to people who lived just a few doors down. So we all come to the point with different with a different paradigm or a different lens of which we look in the world. And I think broadly speaking, and something that would go across cultures is, so over the past, we're talking the past several hundred to potentially, 1,000 years going back, there's been a lot of expectation and pressure on men generally to be the warriors, to be the providers, to be the breadwinners, to be the strong ones. And, and I certainly saw this with my dad. And if we have time, I'll tell you a quick story about my dad and how he's been a motivator for me to do this work. And it wasn't okay. I think a lot of people didn't have time. They're often working 5, 6 days a week to support their families. So probably up until very recently, there was very little time or space for guys to literally be able to stop and what I call drop their armor to be able to delve into their emotions. They've had to keep going. However, and not to say that the issues that affect men don't affect women, but I think they show up very, very differently. Women also experience the pain of redundancy or grief or, oh my gosh, I'm turning 50, what's going on? Those same life changes happen to women, but just very differently. So the world has changed, the way men and women work, the workforce, often both parents working now, people moving away from families. There's all sorts of impact for people and what they're dealing with now. But I think where I see some men opening up more than others is making sure that they have a safe space. And I've heard some men, certainly a lot of my clients, say to me, I feel more comfortable opening up to a woman about what's going on than I would to another man. And you guys might offer some reasons as to why that would happen as well. But I think I can't imagine any man saying to another man, mate, you shouldn't talk about your feelings. It's weak. Just get on with it. They might have in the past, but not now. However, the judgment that often we put on ourselves, we wouldn't extend to others. So I think there's something going on between what we would share with someone else, saying it's absolutely okay, you should get help. There's lots of resources. We all really want to help other people. But I can see how there's still a bit of stigma and we've still got a bit of work to do to make it feel okay to open up and talk about what we're going through so we can get help. So I guess if I had to summarize that, there's a lot of history that's brought us to where we are now as to why people might not feel comfortable opening up for help if they've never learnt it. But we're in a really, really interesting and exciting time where I think there are people, there are resources and certainly publicity about mental health, which is awesome.
Yeah. All of those points are really great, Miriam. And I think, as you said, now the times are changing. People feel more comfortable to talk to each other. For me, most of the times, if I'm not feeling okay about something, I would mostly go to one of my close friends. It can be from any gender. If I feel like I trust that friend and I can have a conversation without feeling vulnerable about it, I'll just go and talk to them. But it needs to be a very, very close friend that I can trust and open up about. I will not open up with everyone around me. And similarly, I guess at work as well, you wouldn't open up about certain things at work with everyone at work. You might find your trusted advisor at work and then share it with them. But I want to bring George into this discussion because George has been on the board of Bipolar Australia for the last 1 year. And he's also worked in the mental health space. And last week, he was also attending something in Canberra, which I'm sure he's going to shed light on now. Do you have any thoughts around mental health for men, George, and any further questions for Miriam?
Yeah, firstly, I want to take up a point about you wouldn't hear a man say to another man, "Oh, mate, toughen up. That's weak," and all of that. And I think to a large degree, Miriam, you're right. You don't hear much of that now. But what about the joke that says, "Mate, you just need a teaspoon of cement. Get on with it."
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Mate, I think you're identifying with the feminine side. Society for too many years, and I was probably part of that originally, women are supposed to be emotional and men are supposed to be stoic. Women are supposed to cry. Men are supposed to have a stiff upper lip. We didn't mind so much when thousands and thousands of men died in battle in the wars, but it was terrible when women did. There's a good friend of mine, Sandra D'Souza, and she talks about equality in the workplace, specifically about women not getting a fair go and being discriminated against. And I said to her a while back about this, and I said, I think you've oversimplified something that you've said, because she talks about an unconscious or subconscious bias and a subconscious discrimination against women. And I honestly believe, when she said that to me that particular day, there's actually, I think that applies to so many things. Mate, what are you doing giving him those bloody toys? He'll grow up to be a bloody girl. Come on, Jimmy, you're playing like a Sheila. Or she's a bloke, she bloody tomboy, that one. So society, we and it probably came from the original men went out, hunters and gatherers and all that sort of stuff. I remember when Bob Hawke cried on television. He was the weakest prime minister we were ever going to have. I actually thought he was human. So I think part of the problem is, sadly, I think we've probably got another 40, 50 years to go, because I think it's going to take another at least 3 or 4 generations for it to get to that right sort of level. I've been in the workforce for some 40 odd years now, closer to 50 actually. And I have seen change in discrimination against women. I have seen change in what's acceptable behaviour from a sexual discrimination perspective. But it has really taken those 30, 40 years for me to see that change. Mental health, on the other hand, I don't think I've really seen a lot of change until the last maybe 10 years. Anybody watching this podcast, and to you two with me, you've got a job interview on next week and you've actually sprained your wrist. You would walk in there and you probably wouldn't have an issue saying, I'm sorry, I sprained my wrist last week. Would either of you or anybody watching this say, look, would we be able to just move that appointment back an hour because I have to go and see my psychologist or my psychiatrist, and I need to do that this week because otherwise I won't be able to get to see them for 3 months? How many people would be brave enough to say that? Not many. Why? Because you don't think anybody would think anything different if you had a bandage on your wrist or around your head. But if the bandage actually needs to be internal, and especially from the chin up, well, now there's a whole lot of story. And so I think it's going to take us at least another 2 generations to get a significant move forward. But it is getting better. It is definitely getting better. But I can tell you, I'm still involved with a number of groups. Well, when I say I'm involved, I have left a number of groups that I was involved with because the attitudes within those groups, either to women or mental health or things like that, I've just gone, you know what? You're a Neanderthal. I'm out of here. So for me, there's so many things that we still need to think about. And I'll give you one very, very simple example. We've heard about this miracle drug, Ozempic, or whatever it's called. Now, it first came out as something to fight diabetes. And then we found out by some accident that it can actually help people with weight loss because it can actually reduce the desire to eat. And there's a shortage for it. And so what the government did was they said, well, you can't get it as a prescription for anything other than diabetes. And Roxy Jacinko, our famous person in her own lunchtime, she needed to do it to make herself look like a size 6 instead of a size 7 or whatever it was. I don't believe those people should be able to get it when people are struggling. But I'll let everybody in on a little secret. People that suffer from bipolar quite often take medication that can put 10, 15 kilos on their weight within 3 to 6 months. People that are depressed, which are people that have bipolar and other forms of depression, have various ways of comforting themselves. Some gamble, some drink, some do drugs, some do sex, and some do a funny old thing called comfort eating. So if you're in a depressive state, mental health, genuine mental health condition, and you want to get that product to help you reduce your weight, you're not allowed to. So now, because you put the weight on, guess what happens to somebody who's depressed and not feeling happy and has comfort food eating as their release? If they can't reduce the weight, they actually add more. So I don't believe that we've thought enough about mental health. And I blame governments for that part, because we've known about it long enough that we could have made more significant amendments at a government level. Takes a while to convert the community. Yep, I wear that. But supposedly you're the people that we're relying on to get this thing right and get it right as quick as we can. And sadly, I think there's a lot more work to be done there.
I really hear you on that. Interestingly, George, my parents run a support group for people with bipolar and schizophrenia up here on the Central Coast where I'm based. And so those discussions have been very close to my heart for a long time from some of the work they do. So I see from what you're sharing.
Are you aware of Bipolar Australia as an organisation?
Sorry, the internet just cut out again. Just say that question.
I said, are you or they aware of Bipolar Australia as an organisation?
I'm not personally aware, but I will ask them.
Okay, because we have a resource page on that, and I would love to make sure that their support group is on our resource page.
Oh, great. Oh, good. We'll have to chat after this.
Sarab. You're doing well so far, mate.
How great joining the dots, talking about fitness.
Sorry to interrupt, Miriam, but that's an important one. We want to help as many as we can.
Yeah, I agree.
So you were saying they run a support group?
Yeah, that's right. So I really feel and hear what you're saying, just from having seen what some of those members and guests go through when they've come to the groups. Obviously, it's mum and dad running that, but I drop in every now and then, and I'm just so proud of the work that they're doing. But I think going back to what you're saying, I was going to say tricky is not really the right word, but before Ozempic, it might have been, there's various things people can do, lap band surgery, but these things need to be sorted at the mindset level as well. So if we're still thinking and operating with that mindset and that mental health lens of not enough, not lovable, not worthy, wanting connection, all those things that are actually going on here and here, if we're not solving at that level, I would imagine it would be inevitable that if you stop taking the medication or, post-surgery, then the same problems end up showing up in different places. So it's really getting to the core of what those issues are for people, which I think is the most important discussion.
Yep. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Nobody wanted to say that they were dyslexic because, and whether your dyslexia was going to prevent you from doing your job to a satisfactory level or not, the mere mention that you had it, you're a dumb guy or a dumb girl, right?
Now it's cool. Now it's very on trend to be dyslexic and have ADHD because it helps you.
I think it's the same thing with autism. Same thing with
Totally.
autism. Being autistic,
Yeah.
or people don't open up about it, even if they show some features of that, because they just feel so shy or vulnerable to share that with others, or maybe just engage into that conversation. But I want to bring back to the point that George just mentioned, Miriam, and I want to know your thoughts around that. So he said that there is a big stereotype in the society when you think about men and when you think about women, that when you are growing up in those initial years, when you're a child, you're being taught things like men needs to be strong, you can't cry. It's a very similar thing. I was born and brought up in India, and it's a very similar thing in Indian culture as well, that men are given a cricket bat, whereas women are given a doll. Men are supposed to not cry because you're a boy. You can't cry. You're a boy. Come on, don't be a girl. And girls can cry because they have got emotions. So you're taught in a way that you feel like you need to be strong, and if you're not strong, you're not a man. And I definitely have a disagreement on that, especially now after growing up and seeing all sorts of things in my life. I feel it's very important to be expressive, either of irrespective of your gender. What do you think about it? And how can we really come out of it? Is it through education, or is it through cultural awareness?
I think it's all of it, and I really see see those perspectives that you've both shared as well. And of course, I grew up in that sort of thinking. I think I've been quite lucky in a way with some of the industries that I've worked in, where either coaching and expressing ourselves, giving feedback, how to tailor our communication. I feel like certainly coming from the fitness industry and then working in education, delivering education in different places, and then certainly the most recent role in IT. But I know not everyone has that privilege. They might have been working in very different cultures, very different industries where that's less accepted. So I guess my answer is that it's all of it. To see something normalized, and I'm certainly seeing in my realm, more guys talking about. We might see this in the sporting community. More men talking about mental health, having to take time out, of playing, of performing, because of mental health and what they're working through. Celebrities talking about their experiences. So I think, perhaps like a lot of situations, the more something is normalized, communicated by well-known people, like, oh, well, if so-and-so went through that and they're like me, or well, they have all the fame, they've got all the money, yet they're still having the same problems that I do. That can help normalize it. So I think it's whatever the awareness might be, whatever's going on in publicity with education. There's schemes like mental health first aid, which are now being rolled out into some corporate workplaces as well. So that doesn't matter which industry you're in, that's available. So we learn, what are the questions I can be asking? Obviously, there was World Mental Health Day in Australia. There's Are You OK Day? And there's lots of different initiatives where we can learn to have better conversations, how to offer a sympathetic or a compassionate ear, and really listen to someone when they're going through something. So yes, we've got a long way to go. I don't deny that. But I think the more that we can think about, well, what can I do? And this is certainly what I do as a coach anyway. I'm just a drop in the ocean, really. But I think, well, what can I do? What impact can I make? That if I can be there for people, offer a safe space, have better conversations, make resources available, and I'll work with men differently to the way that I do women. I'll talk to them differently, because they might still be learning about how to access those emotions. So I think the more that we can expand what we do ourselves, expand our light, focus on the change that we can be, that then starts to rub off to other people. And certainly since becoming, focusing on men's coaching, I've come across so many different organisations, at least in Australia and New Zealand, so many different organisations which tackle men's mental health in a really specific way, because they know often guys won't reach out for help. So organisations like Gotcha for Life, like Men's Table as well, and they're just to name a few. There are many good ones. They offer different activities and different techniques specifically for men for mental health.
Yeah, if you want to get a good gauge of where we're up to, ask 10 women who are currently in the early stages of going to a psychologist, ask 10 men who are currently in the early stages of going to a psychologist, and ask them both the same question. How many of your close friends know that you're seeing a psychologist? I'll guarantee you the woman will be far more, because she will say, oh, Miriam, you don't seem to be yourself. And Miriam will say, no, look, I'm actually seeing a psychologist at the moment, blah, 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 blah. The man, he ain't going to tell that. He's not going to do that. I'm also the CEO of the Ross Hutchison Foundation. And as part of that organisation, we work with people that are escaping domestic violence. The greater majority are women. But from a mental psychological perspective, I've spoken to a couple of men that have gone through that same thing. And in some ways, I think they actually suffer the mental stress worse. They don't suffer the physical stress. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not diminishing the horrendous impact it makes on women. But for a bloke to have to go to work and say, my missus thumped me, not going to happen.
Yeah,
he's got to be somebody that's well and truly got his act together now. I said a while back to somebody in a conversation, I said I would like to see the 5-year test, and I would like to see a band of counsellors ask 10 women, 10 men every 5 years to see whether we're starting to actually get some progress. And if you think about it, I can't remember exactly whether he was the first or just one of the most notable, and I think I've got his name right. But I think it was Ian Roberts who came out in the rugby league and said that he was gay, and that opened up. Very courageous of him, but and if it's not him, whoever it was, I'm sorry, I've got the name wrong. But when you had a bloke who was a rugby league player and he said that, suddenly the world started saying, well, this is a bit. And then you had the entertainers. If you go back in history and you have a look at some of our most famous sex symbols in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all of them were leading secret lives, because there's no way you would survive in Hollywood if you said that you were gay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mental health is now, that's what I say. Mental health to me is about 40, 50 years on that track behind it. But there is a place for it. And the more we talk about it, and the more we get men to open up, and the more people that are prepared to talk about and speak out about it, it'll improve. It'll improve. But we've got a long way to go.
So is there any method that you would recommend, Miriam? And you have talked about a couple of things that people can do to just start a conversation with people they trust. One technique that I shared last week in my video was it consisted of 3 steps, what I generally follow on days when I'm not feeling okay. First step that I do is accepting the fact that I'm not feeling okay. I think that's very important. If you don't even accept the fact, and if you're just running in denial, when you're not feeling okay and you still keep on saying to yourself, no, it's all right, everything is all right, but it's not all right, right? So the first step is, I feel you need to accept the fact that today is not a good day. It's not going well for some reason, and I'm not in the right mental headspace. I think the second step, which I shared, was maybe just to find a person you can trust and share it, have a conversation. and then start working on that. Conversation to identify the triggers that are leading you to think in a negative way. So the triggers can be certain events or situations or moments where you felt that you started thinking in a negative way about something in life. It can be a relationship, it can be something related to work, it can be something related to completely outside of that. But what was that trigger? Where did that happen? And I always look out for triggers in my life where I feel like that situation triggered me to think about certain thing in a negative way or a positive way. And the moment I catch hold of that trigger, then I try to share it with one of my close friends to identify how we can tackle it together. So do you also guide men to identify triggers and then work on those triggers? So do you do some sort of mind mapping? We're getting now technical, very technical.
No, I love what you've just shared, because yes, that would be one of the things that I would do. I feel like we need to co-coach. We can help more people. This is really exciting. But I think what you really hit on there is, even looking at some of those little steps in between to even give ourselves space. So, and often, when people come to me for coaching, that might be the only hour they've given themselves in 2 weeks. And they're like, oh, I've just got an hour or, 90 minutes where I can talk to someone. And, I find myself saying, you can actually do this on your own, where you allow yourself a bit of space. I don't have all the answers, but I can create the space and be a thought mirror, so you can just talk out, what's going on. So I think even just giving ourselves a bit of space, I do believe everyone's got their own inner wisdom or their own inner knowing. But if we're too busy, if we're constantly, I think most people know this now, if we're always on our phones or always doing stuff, it's very hard to create even a little bit of space to go, I've been feeling really stroppy today. I wonder what's going on. Even just giving ourselves a few minutes to really contemplate that, and then look at, what that trigger is. George has arced up at me a few times this week. That's made me feel a bit defensive. Was it George or is it me? You can follow the bouncing ball really quickly and actually start to get to what it is, and then realize, well, is this something I can control? So what can I do about it? Of course, I could get, I could say something to George. It is an option, but more likely it's like, what are the resources within our control, so we can get a sense for our thoughts and our responses, and then start to do something around it. So really like what you've shared around identifying triggers. There's so many different things that I do with clients, but even just giving ourselves that space between the stimulus or the trigger and the response. It could just be a very practical thing of, let's train you up in some deep breathing. Do we have techniques to do a practical physical thing when we're feeling out of sorts, stroppy, when we're feeling dysregulated, whatever the feeling might be, so we can create a bit of space and then start to figure out, well, what are some different things that I can do about this? Something that I've learned, and I don't know about you guys, your blokes, is often men will access feelings in a different way. So if I ask a guy, and this might not always be the way, how are you feeling? I've sometimes noticed guys find it hard to answer that question. Whereas sometimes when I talk to men, and as we're working through this stuff, and say, hey, where's that showing up in your body? You might not have a name for it yet, like angry, for example. They might not be able to say that. But where's this showing up in your body? Okay. And if it had a voice, what would it say? Has it got a temperature? Has it got a color? Is it a tightness? What's that feeling? So getting people to understand where something is in their body in a physical sense gets us out of here and connected to in our body. Then they might actually be able to go, I've actually had a bit of shame sitting there for a while. I'm ashamed of myself for this. I'm ashamed I didn't think of the right thing to say at the right time. And that's just an example.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that you need to be aware of, though, Sarab, is you're a fairly together sort of fellow, and you're way ahead of your age in a lot of ways in your maturity of your thinking and that. And in the overall scheme of things, you don't have a heck of a lot going wrong in your life. So when you try to explain to Mr. X, who is suffering from a psychotic episode, even in a mild form, who is borderline personality or schizophrenic or alcoholic or whatever. And because, see, mental health, people don't put drug addiction and alcoholism, they don't think that's mental health. The mental health is the ones that are schizo, and the mental health is the ones that are, no, it's all part of your mental health, and it impacts on your mental health. So I'm a drug addict, and I'm hanging out and this and this and this and this, and you're saying to me, well, George, just take a few minutes and do this. I can't comprehend that. And so that's the big difficulty. What you're talking about, and I'm not decrying what you're talking about, but I don't want people to think that those that are not in the middle of an episode can in any way, shape or form understand how those that are in the middle of an episode are feeling. And I've said to more than one husband, wife, partner, brother, sister, mother, uncle, aunt, do you honestly think your son, daughter, whoever woke up this morning and said, how can I stuff up my day today? They're not doing it consciously. They're not doing it with deliberateness, So I think the biggest thing that we have to aim at for society is get people to talk and it to be okay to talk about it. Because until they then start to talk to people like Miriam and psychologists and psychiatrists and all those sorts of things, even people like me that are nowhere near as professionally qualified as Miriam, but I've been doing it for 40 odd years, so I've learned a trick or two. And I came from having an alcoholic father, and that took numbers of years for even my sisters and I to get some agreement on that terminology. And I'm not too sure that the three of us are fully aligned in our agreement on that. So I think the big challenge, because you actually don't build a pyramid from the top. You have to build it from the first layer, because you can't put the top in and then everything else just falls. It doesn't work that way. So I think our layering is about making people aware. Society's getting on that track now. Then the next layer is getting people to talk about it more openly. Then the next layer is about people to deal with it more openly. Then the next layer is for those that are actually going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a counsellor or whatever, that society gets to a stage. The Americans are a lot further down this track than we are. If you go to just about any party or whatever, and even a business event, and I don't know whether you've had much to do with Americans, Miriam, but oh yeah, I was talking to my psychologist the other day, or I'm going to see my psychologist. It is just therapist. Like you say physiotherapist and they say psychologist. And everybody outside of America thought they were all weird because they're all crazies. No, they're just more courageous and more open and more honest than the rest of the bloody world, because they would actually acknowledge it. And when you start to get that, then you get to the next level. And then you need the people that really care to put the pressure on the parliamentarians who care when the television's on them, who care whenever the election's coming up. And I genuinely don't believe care anywhere near as much as that once the television's turned off. And sadly, I had that evidence proven to me yet again last week.
Sorry to hear that.
So it's not that they don't care, but they don't care as much when the television's off as when the television's on.
Yeah, interesting motivation. No, I think, with looking at with mental health as well, and you've probably got two camps. And again, longer discussion is people who can afford therapy and doing lots of work on themselves to, and I remember hearing on a podcast ages ago, therapy is sexy. If you're doing therapy, it means you're investing in yourself, and what a great thing that is. And, I sort of had a bit of a chuckle, and I thought, absolutely, I think it's a really attractive quality. Not talking about in a romantic setting, but it's a very attractive quality about someone that they're investing in themselves, in their personal growth, however they choose to do that. But then you've got a large group of people who don't have the money. We're getting funding and getting through all those different hoops, or even having the thinking and support to go, where do I find all these resources? And if you've had a bit of a dopey counsellor who wasn't much good, then that's gonna feel hard to go and get more help, isn't it? Because you're like, well, are they going to be interested in me? So I think, again, bigger discussion, but it's such an interesting look at America, and just saying, of course, everyone seems to be getting therapy.
Yeah. Now, whether they all need it or not that's a whole other discussion. But the thing that I've always admired many, many, many years is their preparedness to be actually open about it. It was if you went to a job interview and you said, look, I'm terribly sorry I'm running late. My counsellor was running about 10, 15 minutes late. It would not cost you a job in America. I'm not sure how it would go for you in Australia.
That's right. Depends on the job, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, we have covered and discussed a lot about mental health and men today, Miriam, and I think we can keep going on and on around this discussion for maybe 2 more hours. And I would definitely love to have you on another episode that we can cover possibly around an overall mental health as well, talking about both men and women next time, and maybe touching upon different aspects of mental health if you want to. But so lovely to have you, and I hope to see you very soon in person if you're in Sydney.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to spend time with you both.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kaura and George Mavros from Sydney.